What do you do when you run out of time? What do you do when you are forced to confront your mortality, your imminent demise, the obliteration of your past, present, and future in an instant, the destruction of everything you hold dear, your hopes, dreams, fears, affections, connections, all vaporized in the blink of an eye? What do you do when you run out of time? I adore the season 6 finale of Red Dwarf. Out of Time is a bitter, bleak gem of an episode, the capstone to and the culmination of the melancholic, subtly oppressive atmosphere that defined the first 2 seasons of the show, condensed into a single 30-minute episode. Even the episode's title exudes a darkly comic bleakness. David Lister, a man marooned 3 million years into deep space, has nothing but time. The notion that he would ever run out of time simply seems absurd. And yet, that is the unfortunate reality that he and the remaining crew of the Red Dwarf come face to face with in this particular episode. And in doing so, form one of the show's most effective and memorable episodes, twisting the viewer's expectations against them and pushing back against the perceived limits of the show's structure to form the purest distillation of Red Dwarf's identity. Blackly humorous, bleak, bitter, but ultimately beautiful, both in spite of these aspects and, arguably, because of them. Season 6 is an incredibly interesting and strange period for Red Dwarf. The season is unified by the overarching concept that the crew has lost Red Dwarf. And for such a potentially humorous concept, the writing plays this idea fairly straight a lot of the time. The crew are then stranded on Starbug, forced to reckon with dwindling supplies and low morale. And whilst this is largely something that the moment-to-moment comedic beats of each episode rarely linger on, Season 6 can be exceptionally funny and incredibly silly at points, there is a heightened, more immediate sense of desperation that always simmers beneath the surface, and by the time we get to the final episode of the season, Out of Time, the crew are coming close to breakdown. The episode opens with a darkly humorous tirade delivered by Rimmer about his growing dissatisfaction being trapped on Starbug with the rest of the crew.
That it can't have escaped anyone's attention that things have been getting rather strained round here of late. It's no secret that morale is on the floor. We've lost all trace of Red Dwarf, tempers are strained, and supplies are low. So, I've decided, if it's all right with you, to appoint myself morale officer and set myself the task of raising the spirits and improving the atmosphere all round. Now, to kick off, I thought it would be productive if we all met once a week to have a coffee or a beer, whatever's your poison, and get any problems we may have off our chests. Any objections?
No, sounds like a very good idea, sir. Excellent.
Well, as it's week 1, why don't I start? You know what it is about Lister that really makes me want to puke? That really makes me want to stab him in both eyes with an ice pick. Everything, that's what. Especially his god-awful, chirpy, gerbil-faced optimism. And as for the cat, what an unbelievable git. And Crichton, if he doesn't change pronto, I swear I'll attach jump leads to his nipple nuts and fry him like a Cajun catfish. Well, I think that's cleared the air. I don't know about you, but I certainly feel better, and thank you for your contributions, gentlemen. See you at next week's morale meeting. Marvellous.
And this scene is actually accomplishing quite a lot here. On the whole, it's incredibly funny, but it also manages to establish just how dire the situation on Starbug is at this point in the series. A situation that is about to be worsened by the intrusion of some familiar but wholly unwelcome faces. I think that, on the whole, Red Dwarf as a series began to pivot more towards an emphasis on inventive and expansive science fiction concepts as the show progressed. The first few seasons of the show see the comedy firmly rooted in the interactions and relationships shared between its characters, and the show's science fiction elements are, comparatively, more lightly employed than they would later become, often serving as a backdrop to these stories and characters. However, once Red Dwarf hits its 3rd season, it's quite easy to notice a distinct shift in its priorities as a comedy. The science fiction elements come to dominate the plot progression and humour of each episode, sometimes to the detriment of those more focused and introspective character interactions. I think I've made it quite clear on this channel previously which approach I have a particular preference for, which is not to disparage or criticise seasons 3 to 6 by any means. There is still a lot of love here. But I find it hard to imagine fans of the show enjoying the more immediate adventure-style comedy of these later seasons if they weren't built on the foundations of those intimate character moments and striking sense of atmosphere that the show manages to establish in those early episodes. But I bring up the division between these two identities and ideas because I don't think that these two approaches necessarily have to be at odds with one another like I may have suggested previously. Rarely does the show unify these disparate identities and styles, it's true. But an episode like Out of Time actually manages to do so, feeling like a worthy successor to the identity and atmosphere of those early seasons, whilst maintaining an incisive focus on highly conceptual science fiction. And Out of Time is pure, unashamed, immediate science fiction, in the same way that Back to Reality and Gunmen of the Apocalypse are undoubtedly science fiction. Those unwelcome intruders I mentioned earlier on are, in fact, future variants of the crew, sent forward in time from the past, seeking help from the present crew to repair their malfunctioning time drive. The future crew ensures that only the present Crichton can communicate with them, fearing the consequences for their future if they were to discover the eventual outcome of their lives. But Lister's curiosity inevitably gets the better of him, and he spies on the future crew through the present Crichton, discovering the terrible true nature of their alternate selves. The crew have been spiritually and morally warped beyond all measure, grown greedy and indulgent, taken to lunching with the Hitlers and lounging in luxury. And whilst this moment is laced with the show's characteristic dark comedy,
Look, you have to understand. We travel back and forth throughout the whole of history, and naturally we want to sample the best of everything. It's just a bit unfortunate that the finest things tend to be in the possession of people who are judged to be a bit dodgy.
Hermann Goering is a bit dodgy.
I've always found this moment to be an entirely shocking and sobering revelation, because regardless of Lister's sloth and ignorance, the cat's self-absorption, and Rimmer's rather inflated ego, the crew of the Red Dwarf are essentially morally good, sound individuals. I don't believe that so many people will have followed their journey for so long without having some form of lasting connection to these characters. And the future crew are entirely unrecognisable to our crew in the present, who, naturally, are horrified.
What has become of you all? You've all abandoned your morals, been seduced by power and wealth. All you're interested in now is indulging your carnal desires.
And could we tell you some stories about that?
I don't recognize any of you. You're just amoral, self-serving scum, freeloading your way through history. Good grief, I can't believe I used to be such a stuck-up, pompous prig.
And thus, the crew are left with a choice. Give in to fate, assist the future crew and doom themselves to a future of moral depravity and personal betrayal, or attempt to exterminate the future crew in a defiant last stand. The choice, of course, is obvious, and despite starting out well, the future crew are far better equipped and decimate their present selves, each one dying in turn until only Rimmer is left. Displaying uncharacteristic bravery, Rimmer realises there is only one way left to save the ship. But the ending is left ambiguous, and we are left with a final shot of Starbug being blown to smithereens, followed by a to be continued title card. As I have previously mentioned, I believe that what Out of Time excels in is this fusion of the early season's lingering sense of cosmic emptiness and melancholy, and the more darkly comedic sensibilities of the latter period of the show. But I would argue that these qualities are fully kicked into overdrive by the immediacy and intensity of the narrative that drives this episode, which ultimately serves to distinguish it from either of these identities, forming an episode that seems wholly unique and special in the process. I would be remiss to neglect earlier attempts at this particular blend of high concept science fiction and pervading sense of hopelessness. Back to Reality, the season 5 finale, is excellent in disorientating the viewer and distorting their perceptions of the show. But I personally find that this episode does squander a great deal of its dramatic tension for the purposes of some admittedly funny but rather goofy moments of comedy. Out of Time in this regard is special, in that it shares the thematic sensibilities of Back to Reality without letting its comedic moments undercut the severity of those themes. Each serves to enhance and highlight the other in the most effective possible way. And even in spite of this ending's rather unsatisfactory lack of resolution, it seems to me a perfect stopping point for the show, tying together the show's disparate sensibilities and serving as an incredibly poignant conclusion. Of course, this was never meant to be the end of Red Dwarf. There were plans to have a resolution replace the cliffhanger we received, and the 2-year gap separating seasons 6 and 7 were largely down to real-world circumstances that were out of the control of the cast and writers. But, regardless of personal opinions of the reinvention the show underwent in seasons 7 and 8, and the subsequent retreat into the tone and style of the middle seasons in the post-revival era of the show, I don't think many of us would disagree that the series has been treading water for quite some time now. Episodes that are enjoyable and serviceable, but are drifting further and further away from the qualities that made the show special in the first place. The same qualities that have likely inspired you to watch a somewhat lengthy video examining and dissecting the show. And I think that Out of Time is the perfect encapsulation of the themes and ideas that defined Red Dwarf, especially in those early seasons. And although I would like to hope that these characters have a happy conclusion in the end, that Lister returns to Earth, that Rimmer can finally come to terms with himself, I don't believe that would be in keeping with the spirit and philosophy of Red Dwarf. In my opinion, what seems far more appropriate is for our crew to go out guns blazing, finding in the conflict with their future selves a sense of purpose, a sense of achievement in standing up and fighting for their beliefs and ideals, even if they know that such a stand will ultimately doom them. As Lister succinctly puts it,
better dead than Smeg.
And the tragic thing is that the sacrifice does and will always go unnoticed. This is, in the end, just a brief, bloody skirmish played out in the outer reaches of space. But, in a way, that is also the beautiful thing about it. In their final, fleeting last moments, they find a sense of identity, a feeling of pride, an affirmation that their lives and actions do have meaning and consequence. Because that's what this show is all about, in my opinion. Striving for a sense of purpose and pride in a seemingly hollow and empty universe. And, in the final moments of Out of Time, our crew may well find it. Better dead than Smeg, my friends. 'Cause time